Okay, everyone. I'm going to give folks just one more minute. Hold on one second. I'm going to do a sound check as well. Hey, everybody. Hey, Shanif, I see you're on. Shanif, if you wouldn't mind, send me a quick Slack message just confirming you can hear me. Want to make sure my sound's coming through okay. Awesome. Good to go. Cool. All right. I'm going to give folks one more minute. I've got 10:59 on my side here while I pull up everything I need. Okay, cool. Well, let's get started here. It looks like we've got a good group in the room. So for those of you who are joining for the first time, what this is my co-founder Shanif and I are doing a series of webinars on the power of Claude. So Claude is Anthropic's AI. I hesitate to say chatbot because it's so much more than a chatbot, but AI tool. Maybe you're very familiar with it already. Maybe you use it a ton for work, or maybe you've never used it before and you want to start using it. This is going to be like every other session that we've had. This session is going to be really geared to somebody who has never used this before. So we're going to get into the specifics. Shanif saying that my sound's a little echoey. So let me see real quick if I can switch mic. The reason I am dialed in, though, is because of my Wi-Fi. So as long as it's not terrible, I'm going to go ahead and just continue with how it is. Awesome. Thanks, Shanif. Okay, cool. So what we're going to do today, the first two sessions that I've done have been all about sales and marketing. So we did, our first session was on SEO and marketing tactics. Our second session was around personalized outreach. So we showed how Claude could do things like go into a prospect's website, take screenshots of their platform, put them into campaigns in Apollo, and then even showed you how we rebuilt a prospect's website from scratch using Claude Code to be able to show them what our product could look like. So everything else was around kind of sales and marketing. Today's session is going to be about data analysis. And this is admittedly the thing that I have geeked out the most on and found the most powerful and just awesome. So I'm super excited. We only have 30 minutes, so I'm going to dive in. What we're going to do today is basically get the data we need, analyze it, all towards figuring out if there's validity to a hypothesis. So if you have questions along the way, my style, again, for those of you who haven't joined before, my style is like, I move really quickly and I probably talk too fast. So if you have questions, use the Q&A feature. I'll be taking a look at that. And I'm happy to pause at any point and answer questions. There's going to be some downtime while we're waiting for responses anyways. So looking forward to hearing your questions, but let's just dive in. So the core of this, I think, anytime I think about like analyzing data, it usually starts with some type of hypothesis. So in this case, I'm one of the co-founders of Nobi. We provide an AI search tool for websites that allow basically brands to have kind of the the ChatGPT experience in their e-commerce store. And so one of the brands that we're partnering with is Lucchese Boots. And one of the hypotheses that they have is that they are losing out on revenue on their website, lucchese.com, because of low inventory. So what I'm going to do is actually use Claude to see if we can get an answer to this. So let me share my screen here. You guys should be seeing Claude. Again, for those of you who haven't used this before, I'm going to walk you through some of the specifics, but why don't I go ahead and just put this prompt in. So one of our customers, www.lucchese.com, has a hypothesis that we are missing out on sales due to low inventory on the site. You should have access to all the shopper behavior in Metabase. So Metabase is a tool that we used within Nobi that tracks all the events that are getting fired by this customer of ours. And so you should have access to all the shopper behavior in Metabase, as well as navigating to the lucchese.com website. Help us figure out if low inventory is impacting conversion rates and revenue. So I'm going to hit enter here because this does take time. And while this is running, I want to explain some of the mechanics of what's happening in the backend. So you can see it's starting up. It's going to take some time. It'll likely ask me some questions. But while that's running, there's a few things here that were critical from an infrastructure standpoint in order to be able to run this. So one is the project folder right here. So I have lots of different folders on the computer. Think of the project folder as basically being the kind of brain that is going to power Claude in this instance. So it's really important that you choose a folder. I've chosen Nobi, which is our, our product folder. So that has access to all the specifics of what Nobi is, how it works, where you can find certain information, right? So that project's really important. So anytime you're working on anything in Claude, make sure you pick a project that is relevant, that gives it the brain. The other thing that you'll see down here is the max plan. So I would highly recommend that you use the max plan. It's anywhere from $100 to $200 a month. I know that's expensive, but you're going to run into credit limits and you're going to get blocked from being able to harness the power of Claude. And I think that you get way more than $100 to $200 a month in value out of this, but that's another thing to clarify. The other one here is asking for approvals. So this is important. You can see it's actually come through. There's a question already that's come through. So what time period should I analyze for this study? Last 30 days. How should I define low inventory? That's a great question. Let's say both out of stock and anything with only 4 sizes or less. What's the primary outpoint you want? I want a quantitative analysis and a summary doc. How do I access? Via Chrome, you'll navigate, and I will also share specific URLs. So I'm going to give it access to Chrome here. But going back to what I was saying before, that ask mode is really important so that you're making sure, first of all, from a security standpoint, you have a handle on everything that it's doing. And second of all, that you're able to kind of guide it appropriately so that it doesn't go run this analysis and then come back with something that isn't super useful to you. So work in a project, pay for the max plan, make sure you have the ask mode, and then probably most importantly, Opus 4.7. So there are different models that Claude uses with widely different levels of power. Opus 4.7 is by far the best for really everything that I've found. If you have basic kind of chat needs, you don't really need the power of Opus 4.7. But when you hear people talk about Claude, holy shit, Claude's amazing, it can do all these things, like a lot of that has come on the backs of Opus 4.6, which was the predecessor to 4.7, and then they just released 4.7. Last bit of hygiene is, let me shift my screen over into some of the connectors. So you remember before I said, go get this data in Chrome. There's a bunch of settings within Claude that you'll want to set up. Again, this stuff takes time, but once you get it set up, the power of this thing, it should just run as autonomously as what I'm showing you in this demo. So with that, there is a Claude in Chrome capability. So you want to be able to allow that extension. It's a quick download of an extension in Chrome, and then you can determine specific websites that you want to block. You can change the dropdown. Do I want to allow or block that extension? So that's super important. It looks like it's coming back, speak of the devil, with that exact request. So it wants to use Google Chrome. I'm going to allow it for the session. Now, I also want to save it some time. So I already pulled up in Metabase the place where it needs to go to write SQL. I do not know how to write SQL. Here is the Metabase URL. So I'm saving it time by saying, look, you have access to my computer. Here's the URL. You should be able to go in and use this. and let me know if you have any issues. But once it gets in here, then it's going to start writing SQL. I have no idea what any of that is, but Claude does. And it can actually navigate the database, find the information it needs. Okay, so this is a unique issue that I'm running into, which is that I have two computers. I have a Mac Mini and I have a laptop that I got everything ready, except I forgot to do that. So I don't want it to use my Mac Mini. I want it to use this laptop. So I'm going to say, don't use the Mac Mini, use my MacBook Pro, because it is trying to log in on another computer that I can't share my screen to show you guys. So typically, if any of you have ever run into this issue, you see this thing come up when you open the Claude extension in Chrome, MacBook Pro, I say connect, I accept that. And so now my fingers are off the keyboard. It is opening up a tab in Chrome, and it will put this URL in that I gave it, and it'll go about writing SQL. So I'm going to pause here because we just went through a lot of different stuff. Recapping what we did, we made sure that we accessed the right project folder. We turned on asking for approval. We set Opus 4.7. We made sure that we're subscribing to the Max plan. We went into Claude, into our settings. We gave it access to Chrome. There are other connectors in here too that it's probably using. So the good news is if it doesn't have what it needs, it'll ask you within the chat, like, hey, you need to be able to enable this connector for me to be able to get in and access this data. But look at it. Again, fingers off the keyboard. This is all Claude. So it's writing SQL. It's seeing the preview right there. Okay, so it's almost like a human being. It would be like, okay, that's the wrong SQL to be writing. Let me update my query and come back to it. And let's see actually how it's thinking through each one of these steps. Whoa, why did it do that? So you can see some of the details here, most of which aren't, if you're like me and you're not, a computer scientist, you're not somebody who has development experience writing SQL, you won't really understand what a lot of this is. And it can take quite a bit of time for it to figure this out because that project folder that I gave it, Nobi, doesn't have detailed documentation around, hey, here's all the different scripts that we run. Here's our database. Here's the merchants table. Here's all the fields. If you want to run this type of analysis, here are the types of fields that you're going to want to join in the table. It doesn't have any of that. So Claude's having to figure this out all on its own. But what came out of this when I did this the other day, you can see, okay, now it's actually written something that's yielding results. It took about 15 to 20 minutes yesterday for it to run this analysis, come up with the right table. And what it came back with was pretty amazing. So it spit out, and I just want to make sure you guys can still see the right thing. Yep. So it spit out this inventory audit where all of this was written by Claude. So it created an Excel spreadsheet. It created the headline estimate here, which is in the past 30 days, I'm estimating you've lost anywhere from $200,000 to $300,000 in revenue. And then it gives me a ton of detail on how it came up with this. So what it did was say, okay, you have two different types of buckets of items. You have stock out, meaning there are no sizes available on the Lucchese website for 38 SKUs. And then you have low stock, which is 1 to 4 sizes. Then the next thing it did, and this takes some iterative back and forth with it, was it tried to calculate how much revenue do we think we've lost from that. And the way that it did that is it went and looked at products in the Lucchese database that had high stock. What were the conversion rates of those products in the same kind of revenue band? So if I'm looking at a pair of boots, and by the way, all these tabs it built out. So every single product that was low stock or out of stock, this was all built by Claude, 123 SKUs. It went through and then it categorized it in a price tier. So it said, okay, this is within kind of 1,000 to 2,500. pricing, how many people in the past 30 days looked at that product, and then let me look at other booths that are in the same pricing tier and see how people looking at the booths converted into add to cart and add to checkout. And I'm going to apply that same conversion for the booths that are in high stock to this low stock and calculate the difference in terms of lost add to carts and lost revenue. So this is pretty cool because it gives you a ton of detail. And again, a lot of this isn't going to make sense. It'd be almost like if a data scientist came to you with this type of report. But you would need to talk to that data scientist. You need to like understand what's going on here. There's a lot of data and understand its methodology. You would push back. I did this in the process. I'd be like, okay, well, I think we're being too aggressive with this assumption. Rerun it, taking that assumption out, and it reruns, updates the entire table. It also provided these URLs so that I can validate that these are actually low stock. So it's really easy for me to just click right from within the spreadsheet. Okay, what are the sizes it has available? Yep, it's totally out of stock. And so I would kind of sanity check half a dozen of these just to be like, okay, directionally this data makes sense, and go from there. So I'm showing you the finished product. Let's see how it's doing. Yeah, see, it does still take some time, which is why I want to be able to kind of bypass the time of waiting and show you the finished product. I want to pause here. I'm taking a look at the Q&A. It looks like we have a question that came in. Are there specific skills in play? For example, the marketing skills from the first webinar. Good question. In this case, no. So for those of you that weren't able to join the first webinar, one of the hygiene things I did was actually installing a plugin, a marketing plugin that Anthropic had created for all kinds of things, SEO, content, etc. In this case, I did not install anything. You could ask Claude, like, hey, before we do this, do you have any inherent skills or plugins that would help you do a better job of this? I bet they do. In this case, I didn't need it, and it came back with something really helpful, but it's a great point. Good question. I want to talk about, while we're kind of waiting, before we close out, what did I end up doing with this analysis? Where are we taking this? I think it's important to zoom out and step back and just say, my last business I had, at our peak, we were like 200 employees, give or take. And there would be things all the time that I wanted, hypotheses, like this one that I had with Luke Casey. There would be stuff like that all the time where I'd have a hypothesis about something about our business that would require a data analyst on our team to spend maybe a week of time coming up with a similar analysis. And I would argue what would come back would be less robust than this. But honestly, most of the time, we just didn't do the analysis. Like, that data scientist had other things that were much more important for him or her to be working on than like the CEO's idea of like, hey, maybe this is a problem. And so this is so powerful that, $100, $200 a month, and just knowing where your data is stored and giving Claude some instructions on kind of how your business works and what you're trying to figure out, that you can, in a matter of minutes, get something back like this. And then in a matter of hours, I'd say it was maybe an hour to 2 hours of back and forth with Claude, be able to zero in on a final data set that makes sense and that, allowed us to kind of start to get an answer. So then the next thing I went is, okay, if I'm going to share this with the client, I need to find a way. I can't share this table. This is like way too complicated. So how do I find a way to summarize a lot of this data so that it makes sense to the customer? And so the next thing I would do was come in, and obviously, again, this thing is still running, but I would say, okay, we have a lot of information here. Can you summarize this in a memo? No more than 2-page memo that I can share with the leadership team at Casey to be able to kind of articulate to them why this is, an issue and what the data is that backs this up and all that. The one thing I'll show you before I did the memo, probably the most important thing I did is I shared this whole logic with Shanice. who has 20 years experience in data science and machine learning. I would discourage you all from running with whatever Claude tells you, even if you've audited the data to your best of your abilities. This data analysis was predicated on it writing SQL in Metabase. And so what I did was I basically went into Claude's full process and I said, okay, this is really great. You've run this great analysis for me. I want to be able to share it with my co-founder who has a bunch of experience in data science, and I want you to document in detail what are the SQL queries that you wrote. I want you to like steel man why you might have gotten this wrong. Like what are assumptions that you made, or things that you did that maybe have data integrity issues or concerns, or things that you're just not sure about. And I had it write that all into a document. I shared it with Shanice. Shanice spent some time, looked through it, and basically came back with a prompt that I needed to send to Claude. And so I would highly recommend you do that. Do not just rely on this stuff if you're not an engineer and you don't know how to write SQL or whatever type of stuff you need to do to pull down data from your internal systems. But whoever the expert is on your team, rather than, again, like I said, spending a week on a project like this, they could spend, I don't know, maybe 30 minutes looking through what came out of this, adding some pushback. And when I sent that back to Claude, it was like very grateful to Shanice for pointing certain things out and said, yeah, he actually pointed some things that I missed. And there's some follow-up questions they would have for Shanice to like make sure that it really understands the details. But for Shanice's case, it saved him a ton of time. In the past, it would have taken him a day or two just to do this. But Claude still needs the experience of a data scientist, someone on your team, to be able to opine. Otherwise, you're very likely to get garbage out. That's an important point. So what came out of this after all was said and done was this spreadsheet. And then I said, okay, data looks good, but I need to be able to find a way to synthesize this. Can you write this up in a 1 to 2 page memo? And out of that, we got something that looks like this. So inventory visibility could be costing us $2.5 million a year in boots alone. That's the headline. I thought that was really cool that's how Claude decided to kind of start the document. And what it came back with looked quite different from this. So if you think through the kind of journey we've gone through here, we went from a hypothesis of like, I think there's an issue here, and I want to use Claude to go in and analyze data to figure out whether or not that hypothesis holds weight. We then got into evaluating the results of that, which was both through me auditing it, pulling up those URLs, making sure the numbers made sense, as well as making sure a data scientist looked at the SQL queries that were written and all the logic that went into calculating these numbers. And then now step 3 is find a way to synthesize that into a clear analysis that you could share with folks who didn't do any of this work, right? And need to be able to like digest this in a super tangible way. And I would say, honestly, step 3 is probably where I spent the most time with Claude, because step 3 is something I understand the most, which is like, if you're an executive trying to distill this information, how do you make it tangible? How do you make it comprehensible? And Claude just kept writing stuff that was like what a data scientist would write. And through a series of back and forth, we were able to land on like a clear summary written in plain English, like a 7th grader could understand this if we were trying to walk them through this. And, some tables that were detailed enough, but not so detailed that we're going to lose the room because we're just getting into the weeds on stuff that, that doesn't really make sense. There's also, of course, call outs, like anytime you're talking about calculating certain numbers, you need to be able to caveat that with like, look, here's how we thought about this being conservative, not conservative enough. So that's in here as well. I've kind of put footnotes to make note of that. But what we came back with eventually was, here's the headline, here's a high level kind of data table so that you can see examples that kind of back this up. here's the methodology. Here's how we went about calculating this. And then given that methodology, here's how we got these numbers. And so now I've gotten this in front of an executive on their team. She's digesting it. We're going to set up time to talk through it. But this went from like, hey, maybe this is an issue. Anecdotally, this feels to be a problem, talking to stores, talking to customers, shopping on the site myself, to now like, it is a problem. Like maybe it's not 2.5 million, maybe it's 1.5 million, maybe it's 3.5 million, given these assumptions. But it is clearly a big enough problem to where it's a 7-figure problem. We should be focused on solving it. Could not have done that without Claude. And now it is impacting our roadmap for the customers. So I met with their e-com team this morning, and they have a bunch of things on the roadmap that do not address this problem. And so if with the executives we align on like, yeah, this is actually like way more important than anything else we're doing, we need to fix this issue, it could, completely change the roadmap of the company. We might have to do this analysis again as we're changing the roadmap. We may say, hey, this other thing's going to fall off. And someone could say, well, I have a theory that if you do that, it's going to hurt revenue in this way. And then you run the analysis. Okay, let's compare the analysis, figure out what the trade-off is in terms of lost revenue that we could be missing out on. So anyway, that's kind of the full process from soup to nuts. Again, it does take some time. So that's why I show you guys both the kind of process as well as the finished product. Any other questions from the group here? I'm going to kind of go navigate to the chat again. Yeah, so there's a question about like kind of related to the plugin. So in order for it to create a document like what I'm showing you here, does it need access to my Google Drive or any other plugins? No, in this case, it actually created the document within Claude. Again, I'm sorry, it's on my Mac Mini, so I can't show you guys like the actual conversation, but you see here on the right, there are these like little blocks for things like progress or documents. It created something within there that was like a docx file that I opened up in my Google Drive. So that wasn't a blocker. That wasn't an issue. Just gonna check any other questions. No. Okay. Looks like we're good. Well, I know we've only got a couple more minutes. As a next step, this is all being recorded. We will share the recording with everybody who registered for the webinar. If this stuff sounds really cool, but you guys are like, I would much rather just pay Nobi to come in and do this work for us than trying to figure this all out ourselves. We do this type of work. We do consulting with AI agents. So feel free to reach out. My email's tyler@nobi.ai, and we can get in touch and kind of figure out what you guys are trying to work on. And then we'll be candid with you if we're like, hey, you don't need AI for that, or you do, but you don't need to engage us as a consultant. We will be super transparent on that side, but we're happy to help you. And this is the third of 4th webinars. So the next and final one is going to be hosted by my co-founder, Shanif, which is actually all about kind of this idea of like how to stop vibe coding and build with code using Claude, how to build projects that are actually secure and sustainable for the long term instead of something you could just spin up on a website really quick, but it's super brittle and can break. So that is by far, I think, the most power you can get with Claude is when you start getting into coding with it. So make sure you join for that. That should be, each of these are every Thursday at the same time. So it should be next Thursday, April 30th at 11 a.m. Central, 12 p.m. Eastern, what is that, 9 a.m. Pacific. So we hope to see you all there. And yeah, thanks so much for taking the time, and talk soon.